Every morning, before the sun fully rose and the streets were still quiet, she would unlock the small diner and start the day. The smell of fresh coffee brewing mixed with the soft hum of the old refrigerator. It was a simple place with checkered tablecloths and chairs that had seen better days, but to her it was home. The regular breakfast crowd wouldn't arrive for another hour or two, which gave her a chance to organize, clean, and prepare. He arrived almost exactly at 7 every morning. She had noticed him from the first day she worked there, sitting at the same table by the window, his coat worn but neatly kept, his hair gray and thinning. He always ordered the same thing, the cheapest item on the menu, and a cup of black coffee. He didn't speak much, but he had a gentle presence that made the place feel calmer. At first, she thought he was just another lonely old man with a routine, but over time, she realized there was something special about his quiet way of observing the world. She started making little gestures that most people might overlook. A refill of coffee before he asked, a warm smile when he looked up from his newspaper, a careful placement of the sugar packets just the way she noticed he liked them. Sometimes, when she had extra change, she would leave a small note on his table wishing him a good day or covering a part of his breakfast. She never expected anything in return. The little things made her feel connected, and she imagined they brought a little warmth into his mornings too. Other staff didn't understand why she spent so much time on him. Some whispered that he was just another customer and didn't deserve special attention. They didn't see the way his eyes lit up when she brought his coffee with a gentle nod, or how he seemed to relax, almost sighing in relief, when she placed a warm napkin beside his plate. For her, it wasn't about money or recognition. It was about noticing a human being who seemed unseen by the rest of the world. As days turned into weeks, their small interactions became a silent friendship. She learned to read his subtle cues. A stiffening in his posture meant he was tired. A brief smile meant he was in good spirits. Occasionally, he would nod in acknowledgement when she spoke, or offer a small comment about the weather or the news. She never pushed him to talk more than he wanted, respecting his quiet nature. Yet, she noticed the small things, how he seemed more alert after she served him, or how he lingered a little longer over his meal than he did with others. Winter came, and with it, harsh mornings that made the city streets glisten with frost. The old man would arrive bundled up, shivering slightly as he entered the warmth of the diner. She started adding an extra blanket to his chair, just tucked over the back, and placed a warm cup of cocoa in front of him if she could spare it. The gesture was small, but she could see how much it meant to him. His hands, weathered and thin, would wrap around the cup for a moment longer than necessary, as if holding on to more than just the drink. There was a story behind him, she sensed, though he never shared it. Sometimes, in his quiet way, he would mutter fragments about old times, travels, or responsibilities. She would listen, nodding gently, allowing him to speak without judgment or interruption. She didn't need details. Just being heard was enough. It was rare, in a world so fast and loud, for someone to be truly listened to, and she provided that without realizing how meaningful it was to him. Occasionally, she would catch glimpses of a different side of him. His hands, though fragile, showed strength from years of work. His eyes, behind the glasses that always slipped down his nose, held a depth that told of experiences beyond the ordinary. The way he observed people in the diner, sometimes smiling at children or acknowledging staff, suggested a quiet kindness, or perhaps a careful attention to the world he moved through. She wondered what his life had been like before these quiet mornings at the diner. Despite the modest appearance, there was a dignity about him. He carried himself with a subtle pride that wasn't loud or showy, but noticeable if one paid attention. He didn't beg for attention, nor did he complain. He simply existed with quiet grace, and she found herself inspired by it. On days when her own life felt heavy with bills, responsibilities, or personal struggles, his calm presence reminded her that small acts of care could matter more than grand gestures. Their routine became predictable but comforting. She prepared his table just as he liked it. He arrived, nodded in acknowledgement, and she served him with a gentle smile. Sometimes he would leave a little note of thanks or a small gesture of gratitude. A few coins extra, a handwritten message, or simply a nod. They didn't need to speak much to understand each other. There was trust in the unspoken, and the rhythm of these mornings became a quiet anchor in both their lives. One particularly cold morning, she noticed he seemed more tired than usual. His steps were slower, and his coat hung loosely on his frame. She took an extra moment to bring him a warm scarf she had tucked behind the counter and offered an extra cup of tea along with his coffee. He looked up at her, eyes softening, and for the first time, he spoke a few words beyond the usual polite exchanges. He said, "Thank you, I appreciate this." The simplicity of the statement carried weight. It wasn't about the drink or the blanket. It was about noticing, caring, and being seen. The staff continued to gossip, not understanding why she went out of her way for him. But she didn't mind. The diner was her world, and within it, she could create moments of genuine connection. She didn't expect recognition or reward. Each morning, the routine started again. Cleaning, brewing coffee, preparing plates, and waiting for him to arrive. And every morning he did, walking in quietly, settling into his seat, and finding a small part of warmth and kindness in her presence. She sometimes imagined that in a life filled with challenges, loneliness, and obscurity, their mornings were a small reprieve for him. For her, it was a lesson in empathy, patience, and the quiet joy of helping someone simply because it was right. She didn't know his full story, and she never pressed for it. It wasn't necessary. The act of being present, consistent, and attentive was enough to forge a connection that words alone couldn't capture. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, and still their routine persisted. Each morning, she unlocked the diner doors, brewed the coffee, and set the tables, knowing he would come. He arrived, always on time, with a soft nod and a polite smile. She served him, watched him drink, and sometimes, just sometimes, he would look up from his cup and meet her eyes with a quiet acknowledgement that said, without words, that he was grateful for her presence in his mornings. It was simple, it was small, but it was real. And in the quiet, unremarkable moments of the early mornings, a bond formed between a young waitress and an elderly man, one built on kindness, respect, and the gentle understanding that even the smallest gestures could make a world of difference. Little did she know, this ordinary routine would soon take an extraordinary turn, revealing that appearances could be deceiving and that every person has a story far greater than one might assume. As the weeks passed, their quiet routine continued to grow into something more meaningful. She had begun to notice subtle changes in the old man, small signs that revealed more about him without him needing to speak. Some mornings, he would linger a little longer over his coffee, staring out the window at the streetlights fading in the early sun. Other mornings, he would tap a finger against the table, lost in thought. She learned to read these small gestures, understanding when he needed a refill, when he might want a hot meal instead of something simple, or when he just wanted to sit in silence. On days when the diner was busy, she would make sure to check in on him quietly. She would bring him his coffee before it got cold, or make a small adjustment to his table, so he felt seen and cared for even amid the chaos. Her coworkers often joked that she treated him like royalty, but she didn't mind. She knew there was a reason she went out of her way for him, even if she couldn't quite explain it herself. It was a feeling of warmth and connection that was hard to describe, but she recognized it whenever she looked at him and saw the faint smile he gave her in return. Sometimes, she would overhear his murmured thoughts, fragments of stories from his past. He would mention traveling long ago, working on important projects, or the friends he once had. He never gave names or details, just hints that his life had been full, even if he now sat quietly with a cup of coffee in a small diner. She listened attentively, asking gentle questions when appropriate, and letting him speak without interruption. She found herself imagining what his life must have been like, picturing the places he described, the people he mentioned, and the experiences he had survived. During the colder months, she became even more attentive. She would make sure a blanket was draped over the back of his chair, and sometimes she would slip a small pastry onto his plate without asking. The old man never requested anything extra, but when she left something for him, she could see the subtle gratitude in his eyes. He didn't speak many words, but the way he held his hands around the cup or adjusted the napkin showed her that he appreciated the thoughtfulness. It wasn't about the food or the blanket. It was about being noticed and cared for, and she understood that better than anyone else seemed to. Her small acts of kindness were not limited to physical comfort. She often engaged him in light conversation, asking about the weather, the news, or the simple events of the day. He sometimes responded with short answers, but other times he shared a little more than usual. She learned to cherish those moments, when he opened up even slightly, because they were rare and precious. She never pressed for more, understanding that he shared as much as he felt comfortable. She respected his privacy and his pace, which seemed to deepen the trust between them. One day, a particularly harsh winter morning found him shivering as he entered the diner. She noticed immediately that he seemed weaker than usual. Without hesitation, she fetched an extra blanket, placed a warm cup of tea beside his coffee, and offered a kind word. He looked up at her, his eyes softening, and for the first time, he spoke more than a simple thanks. He said, "I don't know what I would do without these mornings." The words were quiet, almost a whisper, but they carried a weight that touched her deeply. She realized that her small gestures were making a real difference in his life, and that realization filled her with a sense of purpose and pride. As the days went on, she noticed that the old man would sometimes leave small notes for her. They were brief, polite messages expressing gratitude or offering a small observation about the world. They never mentioned anything personal, but they were meaningful. It was clear that he appreciated the consistency, the attention, and the kindness she provided. These notes became something she looked forward to, a tangible reminder that her efforts were recognized, even if silently. The bond they shared was subtle but powerful. It was built on trust, empathy, and the simple human need to be seen and valued. She found herself thinking about him during her days off, wondering if he had a good breakfast or if he needed anything. She realized that the connection went both ways. Just as she brought warmth to his mornings, he brought something to hers. A sense of fulfillment, a feeling that she was doing something meaningful, and a quiet joy in being part of someone else's life. She also began to notice small changes in his demeanor. He seemed more at ease, more willing to engage, and occasionally he would offer a faint smile that lingered longer than usual. There was a gentle dignity in the way he carried himself, even as his body grew frailer. He had a quiet strength that she admired, and she found herself inspired by his resilience. It made her reflect on her own life and the small ways she could bring kindness and attention to others around her. On some mornings, she would catch him watching other customers, sometimes offering a nod or a small smile to children or families passing by. He had a subtle way of noticing the world, observing the details that many others overlooked. She admired this quality, realizing that his attentiveness extended beyond their little interactions. It reminded her that there is value in paying attention, in noticing the small details that make life richer, and in treating people with care and respect. Their routine became more than just a daily ritual. It became a silent friendship, a quiet companionship that didn't need words to exist. She learned to anticipate his needs, to read the small cues that indicated comfort or discomfort, and to respond with thoughtfulness and care. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, a desire to make his mornings as peaceful and warm as possible, knowing that these small moments of attention were deeply meaningful to him. As the months passed, she noticed that he seemed to trust her more. He began to share small fragments of advice or thoughts about life, speaking softly and deliberately. He spoke about patience, the importance of noticing others, and the quiet strength found in consistency and kindness. She listened attentively, absorbing these lessons without judgment. It was clear that he had lived a full life and that he wanted to pass on some of the wisdom he had gathered, even in these simple, brief exchanges. She also realized that her efforts were not going unnoticed in subtle ways. The old man's quiet acknowledgement, the small notes he left, and the way he looked at her with appreciation all reinforced the value of her kindness. It wasn't about recognition from the world, but about the impact one person could have on another's life through consistent, caring actions. This understanding motivated her to continue, to be present and attentive, and to embrace the small moments that made a difference. One morning, after serving him his coffee and checking that his blanket was comfortable, she noticed him pausing longer than usual. He seemed reflective, almost hesitant. He placed a hand over his cup, as if steadying himself, and then met her gaze with a quiet intensity. He didn't speak immediately, but the look itself conveyed gratitude, respect, and an unspoken connection. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that their relationship was built not on words, but on mutual care and understanding. The diner, with its modest tables and simple menu, became a stage for these small but significant moments. She came to understand that kindness doesn't need grand gestures or dramatic expressions. Sometimes, it is in the consistency of showing up, in the attentiveness to someone's needs, and in the small acts of care that ripple quietly through someone's life. The old man's presence, and her response to it, became a lesson in human connection and the profound effect of empathy. Days blended seamlessly into weeks, and weeks into months, yet the rhythm of their mornings never faltered. She unlocked the diner doors, prepared the coffee, and set the tables, knowing he would come. He arrived always punctually, with the same gentle nod, and she served him, watching as he enjoyed his breakfast. The bond between them deepened, invisible to most but undeniable to both of them. It was a quiet understanding, a silent friendship forged in the warmth of human attention and care. She sometimes wondered what he thought about her, if he considered her part of his life beyond these mornings. She didn't need an answer, knowing that the connection itself was enough. The small acts, the attentiveness, and the respect had created something rare and valuable. It was a reminder that every person has a story, and that even unnoticed kindness can leave a lasting impact on someone's life. These mornings, ordinary as they seemed, were extraordinary in their simplicity and in the depth of connection they fostered. As time went on, the young waitress began noticing that the old man's mornings carried a certain weight that she could feel but not fully understand. There were moments when he seemed lost in thought, staring out the window as if seeing a world beyond the small diner. His eyes sometimes reflected memories of places far away or times long past. He would mutter to himself softly, as though remembering a conversation or a decision made many years ago. She learned to give him space during these moments, simply placing his coffee on the table and letting him sit in peace. There was a quiet dignity in these pauses, and she felt privileged to witness them. She also began to notice little details about him that made her curious. The way he carried himself suggested a life of discipline and responsibility. Even his worn clothes were neat and well kept, as though he had once been accustomed to standards higher than the diner itself. She wondered what kind of life he had lived, imagining that he had been someone of importance in a world she had never seen. But she never asked directly. It wasn't her place, and she knew that he would share what he wanted when he was ready. She respected his privacy, and her patience became another way of showing care. Some mornings, he would bring small items with him. A newspaper clipped together with a rubber band, an old notebook, or a photograph tucked in his pocket. Occasionally, he would glance at these items during breakfast, lost in thought, before slipping them back into his coat. She never pried, but she noticed the reverence in the way he handled these objects. They seemed to carry memories or significance that were deeply personal. Watching him, she realized that everyone carries stories beneath the surface, stories that are invisible to the casual observer. Their routine remained steady, but small changes hinted at a deeper complexity in his life. He sometimes seemed distracted, as if anticipating events beyond the diner. There were fleeting moments when he would glance toward the door with alertness, almost as though expecting someone to arrive. She didn't understand the significance of these glances, but she trusted that he was simply cautious by nature. Over time, she became attuned to these subtle behaviors, learning when to speak, when to smile, and when to let silence prevail. One morning, a heavy rain poured down, drumming against the diner windows and creating puddles on the street outside. He entered, soaked and shivering, and she immediately brought a towel and a hot cup of tea, setting it beside his coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he took the tea, and he murmured a quiet thanks. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on hers, as if trying to communicate more than words could express. Something about that morning felt different, heavier, as though the rain mirrored a change in his mood. She stayed close, attentive and patient, letting him take his time before beginning his day. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that their connection went beyond the simple acts of kindness she provided. There was a silent understanding between them, a recognition that each was noticing the humanity in the other. She brought warmth and attention, and he responded with subtle gratitude and trust. It was a rare and beautiful bond, formed without expectation or obligation, simply through consistent care and presence. Occasionally, the old man would make brief comments that revealed glimpses of his past. He would speak of distant cities, important meetings, or decisions that shaped the lives of others, but always in vague terms. He never revealed specifics, only hints. She listened, fascinated, imagining the life behind the carefully measured words. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried his history, a sense of responsibility that had never faded even in retirement. Each morning, she felt she was witnessing the calm aftermath of a life once full of action and influence. As the seasons changed, she noticed him taking longer pauses over his food and drink. He seemed reflective, almost contemplative, as though the diner had become a place of quiet refuge. She realized that her small gestures of care were more meaningful than she had imagined. They provided comfort, stability, and a sense of companionship in a world that might have otherwise overlooked him. The simple act of showing up, of preparing a warm meal and listening attentively, was powerful in ways she hadn't anticipated. There were mornings when other customers would come and go, bustling and chatting, yet he remained unaffected, lost in his own world. She noticed that he didn't seek attention or recognition. His presence was understated, almost invisible to those who did not know him. But to her, he was unmistakable, significant, and quietly commanding. The contrast between his ordinary appearance and the depth she sensed in him fascinated her, and she found herself drawn to understand him without needing answers. One particular morning, he arrived with a small envelope in hand, which he placed on the table before. Speaking, he did not immediately address it, instead sipping his coffee as usual. When she finally asked gently about the envelope, he simply said that it was nothing important, a routine matter. She didn't press, understanding that some things were private and not meant to be shared. Still, the envelope sparked her curiosity, hinting at a world beyond the diner that she could only imagine. Over time, she noticed subtle changes in his behavior toward her. He began acknowledging her efforts more often, offering small smiles or brief words of appreciation. These moments were rare but meaningful, and she treasured them. It became clear that her presence and care mattered to him in a way that transcended simple courtesy. The trust between them deepened, forming a quiet companionship that was unspoken yet undeniable. Her own life began to feel enriched by the connection. The early mornings, the attention to detail, and the small acts of kindness created a sense of purpose she had not felt elsewhere. She began to notice other people in the diner more, understanding that everyone carries unseen burdens and stories. This awareness extended beyond her interactions with the old man, influencing the way she treated coworkers, customers, and strangers alike. There were also moments of gentle humor. Occasionally, he would make a subtle joke or an observation that would catch her off guard, making her smile or laugh quietly. These small exchanges added warmth to their routine, lightening the otherwise quiet mornings. She began to appreciate the layers of his personality, the quiet dignity, the depth of thought, and the occasional glimmers of playfulness that revealed a more human, approachable side. As the months passed, she began to sense that the old man's life was more complicated than it appeared. He carried an air of authority, a presence that suggested experience and influence. Yet he chose to live quietly, blending into the ordinary world of the diner. She marveled at the contrast between what she could observe and the life he might have lived elsewhere. The mystery added to her curiosity, but also to her respect for him. She understood that he was more than what met the eye, and that some parts of a person's story remain private for a reason. On some mornings, she noticed him watching the entrance as if expecting someone. His eyes would flicker toward the door, alert yet calm, and she would sense a tension beneath his composed exterior. She didn't know who he was expecting, or if it was something from his past, but she grew attuned to these moments. They became part of the rhythm she observed, subtle shifts in mood and attention that revealed the layers of his experience and life. Despite these hints of a hidden world, their mornings remained consistent and comforting. She continued to serve him with care, attention, and warmth, noticing the small cues and responding with thoughtfulness. Their bond, built on empathy, patience, and shared quiet moments, grew stronger. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her presence mattered, even if only in small ways, and that she had become a meaningful part of his daily routine. The old man, in turn, seemed to respond to her constancy. He trusted her, opened up in small ways, and showed subtle appreciation for her efforts. The relationship was not about wealth, status, or obligation. It was about human connection, the kind that forms quietly, steadily, and with lasting impact. She realized that the trust and companionship they shared were rare, a reminder that meaningful relationships do not always need words, but are built on presence, attention, and understanding. As she prepared his coffee one morning, she thought about how much she had learned from him. Patience, dignity, quiet strength, and the power of small gestures had become lessons embedded in her daily routine. She felt grateful for the opportunity to witness his life in these small snapshots, understanding that ordinary moments could hold extraordinary meaning. The bond they shared, though subtle, had a profound effect on both of them, shaping their mornings into something that neither would soon forget. And yet, beneath the calm routine, there was a sense that change was coming. Something about the way he carried himself, the subtle attention to the entrance, and the hints of past responsibilities suggested that their mornings, as steady and comforting as they had been, might soon be touched by events beyond their control. She did not know what these changes would bring, but she trusted the bond they had formed would help them navigate whatever was ahead. The quiet trust, respect, and human connection they shared would be the anchor in whatever storm might come. One morning, the young waitress arrived at the diner as usual, expecting the quiet routine of setting tables and brewing coffee. The streets outside were busy with the sounds of early commuters, and the smell of rain lingered from the night before. She unlocked the doors and began her work, arranging the chairs, wiping the counters, and preparing the coffee just as she always did. There was a sense of normalcy in the air, the familiar rhythm of the diner comforting and predictable. Then, just as the old man entered, something unusual happened. He walked in, coat buttoned tightly against the cold, but he did not settle into his usual seat immediately. Instead, he paused near the entrance, glanced around, and straightened his posture in a way that suggested anticipation. She noticed a tension she had never seen before, and her curiosity was piqued. Something was different today, though she could not yet tell what it was. Before she could serve him, the diner doors opened with a forceful push, and 4 men in dark suits and sharp shoes stepped inside, followed closely by 2 more individuals carrying briefcases. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly. The chatter of the other customers faded as eyes turned toward the new arrivals. The old man stood still, his hands resting on the edge of the table, calm yet alert. She felt a sudden nervousness herself, unsure of what was about to unfold. The men in suits approached him directly, speaking in quiet, urgent tones. It became clear that they were lawyers, and the briefcases suggested official business, documents, or important papers. The 4 others, tall and imposing, were bodyguards, standing strategically near the diner entrances. The sense of authority they carried was unmistakable. The old man did not appear surprised by their presence. Instead, he greeted them with a composed, measured nod, as though he had expected them all along. The waitress, frozen for a moment, could hardly believe what she was seeing. This was the quiet man she had served every morning, the one who ordered a simple breakfast and rarely spoke more than a few words. Now he was surrounded by people who clearly respected and feared him in equal measure. She wondered what kind of life he had led to warrant such a response, and a mix of awe and confusion washed over her. The lawyers spoke softly but firmly, presenting papers and explaining matters in legal terms that were unfamiliar to her. She listened from a distance, piecing together that something significant was happening, though she could not fully grasp the details. The bodyguards remained alert, scanning the diner and the street outside, their presence a clear signal that the old man's affairs were of great importance. Customers whispered among themselves, some leaving quietly, sensing the tension, while others watched, captivated by the sudden drama. The old man responded with calm authority, signing documents and giving instructions. Despite the sudden intrusion, he remained composed, displaying a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the sudden activity around him. The waitress watched, fascinated, realizing that her regular customer was not just an ordinary man, but someone who had wielded influence and responsibility far beyond the diner's walls. The contrast between his daily simplicity and the world he had inhabited struck her deeply. At one point, one of the lawyers glanced toward her, as though noticing her for the first time. She felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity, unsure of what his acknowledgement might mean. The old man, noticing her hesitation, offered a small, reassuring nod. It was as if he wanted her to understand that her role in his life had been meaningful, even though the world outside this diner was now intruding on their quiet routine. The gesture was brief but filled with significance. The bodyguards moved with quiet precision, ensuring the space around the old man was secure while allowing the diner to function. They did not speak to the staff or customers unnecessarily, but their presence created an undeniable sense of order and authority. She noticed how the old man directed them with subtle gestures, a hand here, a nod there, indicating his familiarity and comfort with the situation. He was clearly in control, even amid the sudden upheaval of his usual morning routine. During the meeting with the lawyers, she observed small details that revealed the old man's character. His hands, steady and deliberate, handled each document with care. His eyes scanned each page attentively, showing a depth of understanding and responsibility. He was not rushed or flustered, despite the urgency suggested by the presence of the lawyers and bodyguards. Instead, he displayed the calm composure of someone who had managed complex situations many times before. At one point, the old man paused, glancing at the waitress as he spoke to the lawyers. He gestured slightly, inviting her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment, then approached, unsure of what was expected of her. He spoke softly, explaining that she had been an important part of his life in a way that mattered beyond the daily routine. He expressed gratitude for her kindness, attentiveness, and the humanity she had shown without knowing who he truly was. Her eyes widened in surprise, realizing that the quiet interactions they had shared every morning had been noticed and valued far more than she had imagined. The lawyers, still focused on the documents, allowed the moment to pass with respectful silence. The bodyguards remained vigilant but did not intrude, understanding that this was a personal acknowledgement, not part of the formal proceedings. The waitress felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, and a profound sense of connection. She realized that the small acts of care she had offered each morning had mattered deeply to someone who had lived a life of great responsibility and influence. The old man's calm and measured way of interacting with her created a bridge between their two worlds, the ordinary routine of the diner and the extraordinary demands of his life outside it. She noticed that despite the presence of the lawyers and bodyguards, he treated her with the same respect and warmth he had always shown. It was a quiet lesson in humility, gratitude, and the importance of recognizing the humanity in others, regardless of status or circumstance. As the meeting progressed, the old man continued to provide instructions and sign necessary papers. The bodyguards ensured that no interruptions occurred, while the lawyers completed their tasks with efficiency. Yet through all of this, he made small gestures toward the waitress. An acknowledgement, a nod, a brief word of thanks, reminding her that their connection remained intact, even amid the intrusion of his complex world. She reflected on the journey that had led to this morning. The months of serving him, noticing his subtle cues, providing small comforts, and simply being present had created a bond that transcended ordinary customer and server interactions. She realized that her patience, empathy, and consistent kindness had been noticed and valued in ways she had never anticipated. The experience left her with a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her efforts had mattered to someone who carried immense responsibilities. By the time the lawyers and bodyguards concluded their tasks, the diner had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The old man settled into his usual seat, sipping his coffee with a relaxed posture, and the young waitress resumed her duties. Yet, the events of that morning had changed everything. She now understood the depth of his life and the significance of their quiet friendship. The bond they had formed over simple, daily interactions had stood firm even when confronted with the extraordinary demands of his outside world. The old man finally spoke to her directly, his voice soft but deliberate. He expressed appreciation for the genuine care she had shown, emphasizing that it had not gone unnoticed. He explained that in a life filled with obligations, responsibilities, and power, her simple acts of kindness had provided a rare and meaningful sense of comfort. She felt a mixture of humility and pride, understanding that her presence had created something invaluable in his life. The bodyguards and lawyers, sensing the personal nature of this exchange, allowed the moment to unfold without interference. It was a quiet affirmation of the human connection that had developed over months of shared mornings. The young waitress realized that her role, though small in the grand scheme of his life, had been profoundly significant. The recognition she received was not material or transactional. It was rooted in genuine gratitude and respect. As the morning continued, the old man returned to his routine, sipping his coffee and observing the world outside the window. The young waitress, now aware of the magnitude of his life beyond the diner, continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She understood that her small gestures, her attentiveness, and her consistent care had bridged the gap between their worlds, creating a bond that neither wealth nor power could diminish. By the end of the morning, the lawyers and bodyguards departed, leaving the old man and the waitress alone in the diner once more. The ordinary rhythm resumed, but the significance of the morning lingered in the air. She realized that life often holds hidden depths, that the people we encounter may carry stories and experiences far beyond what we perceive. The quiet moments of empathy, patience, and kindness can leave lasting impressions, shaping relationships and leaving a legacy that is invisible yet profound. She returned to her work, mindful of the extraordinary turn of events, yet grateful that the simple connection she had nurtured remained intact. The old man, sitting quietly with his coffee, offered a small smile and a nod, a reminder that their bond had endured. The morning had revealed the extraordinary hidden behind the ordinary, and she felt honored to be part of it. It was a moment she would carry with her, a lesson in the power of human connection, and the enduring impact of small, sincere acts of care. The morning after the lawyers and bodyguards had visited, the diner felt quieter than usual. The streets outside were calm, and the early sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the checkered tables. The young waitress arrived with the usual routine, but there was a sense of anticipation she couldn't explain. She arranged the chairs, wiped the counters, and brewed the coffee, wondering how the old man would enter today after the extraordinary events of the previous morning. When he arrived, he moved with his usual quiet grace, coat neatly buttoned, scarf tucked around his neck. There was no hint of the business and authority that had filled the diner the day before. He gave her a small nod and settled into his usual seat by the window, as if everything had returned to normal. She poured his coffee, careful to get the temperature just right, and placed the warm napkin beside his plate. Their connection, built over months of shared mornings, seemed to resume effortlessly, yet the knowledge of his true identity added a layer of meaning to every gesture. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, similar to the ones he occasionally brought before. This time, however, he handed it to her directly. She hesitated for a moment, realizing it was likely important, yet there was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet expectation. She accepted the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter expressing gratitude, appreciation, and recognition for the kindness and attention she had shown over the months. He wrote about how rare it was to encounter someone who treated him as a person rather than a title, and how much that had meant in his daily life. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the words. The letter went beyond mere thanks. It acknowledged the emotional impact of her care, the small gestures that had made his mornings bearable and even joyful. He spoke of how her attentiveness had reminded him of the goodness in the world, even for someone who had experienced both power and isolation. She realized that the bond they had formed, built quietly over months, had left a profound mark on both of them. The old man spoke softly, explaining that he wanted to ensure she understood the significance of her role in his life. He told her that in a world often focused on status, money, and appearances, her simple acts of kindness had provided genuine human connection. He emphasized that it was not the material gifts or grand gestures that mattered, but the sincerity and consistency she had shown every morning. Her heart swelled with pride, not for herself, but for the difference she had made in someone's life without expecting anything in return. She realized that the envelope also contained a small token, a way for him to offer practical support and recognition. While she had never served him for any reward, the gesture felt meaningful, a tangible reminder that kindness and attention are never wasted. The old man explained that he wanted her to continue her work with confidence, knowing that her actions mattered deeply, and that the care she showed could ripple through the lives of others in ways she might never fully see. As the morning progressed, they shared quiet conversation, discussing ordinary things: the weather, the diner, and the subtle changes in the neighborhood. Yet beneath the ordinary topics was a profound understanding between them, a shared recognition that their relationship had transcended the typical boundaries of server and customer. She felt a sense of completeness, knowing that their bond was based on empathy, trust, and genuine human connection. The old man also reflected on the events of the previous day, the presence of lawyers and bodyguards, and the sudden intrusion of his world into the diner. He spoke about how reassuring it had been to see her there, maintaining the warmth and normalcy of their routine amidst the extraordinary circumstances. Her calm presence had reminded him that there were constants in life, people whose care and attention were genuine, and that such moments were invaluable. Throughout the morning, she noticed the subtle ways in which he expressed gratitude: a nod, a soft smile, and the occasional word of appreciation. These gestures, combined with the letter and the token, reinforced the depth of his recognition. She understood that this was more than a simple thank you. It was a testament to the power of human connection, the impact of consistent kindness, and the importance of noticing and caring for others in meaningful ways. Other customers came and went, some curious about the changes in the diner, others oblivious to the quiet drama that had unfolded. She continued to serve them with her usual attentiveness, yet her mind remained aware of the significance of the morning. The old man's presence, calm and composed, served as a reminder that extraordinary lives could exist behind ordinary appearances, and that simple gestures of care could have profound effects. As the day continued, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. The months of early mornings, careful attention, and genuine kindness had created a connection that neither time nor circumstance could erase. She realized that her work at the diner, once just a means of earning a living, had become a platform for meaningful human interaction, teaching her lessons about empathy, patience, and the quiet power of small gestures. The old man, for his part, seemed more relaxed than she had ever seen him. There was a sense of peace in his demeanor, a calm that came from knowing that the people around him, especially the young waitress, understood and valued the essence of who he was. He continued to interact with her in the same gentle, respectful manner, reinforcing the idea that their relationship was built not on social status or expectation, but on genuine human regard. As the morning drew to a close, the old man prepared to leave, his coat buttoned and scarf adjusted. He paused for a moment, looking at the young waitress with an expression that conveyed deep appreciation and quiet pride. He thanked her once again, not for any material reason, but for the simple truth of her presence and care. She felt a warmth in her heart, knowing that the impact of her actions would resonate long after the moment had passed. When he departed, the diner returned to its regular rhythm, but the significance of the events lingered. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that the small, consistent acts of attention and kindness she had shown could have lasting effects. The experience reinforced her belief that true human connection is rooted in empathy, respect, and the willingness to notice and care for others, even when no one is watching. She continued her work throughout the day, serving other customers with the same attentiveness, but now with a deeper awareness of the unseen stories behind each person who entered the diner. The lesson she had learned from the old man was clear. Every individual has a life full of experiences, responsibilities, and challenges, and the simple act of genuine care can provide comfort, dignity, and connection. In the days that followed, she reflected on the extraordinary turn of events. The letter, the token, and the acknowledgement from the old man had confirmed what she had always felt. Her kindness mattered. It had created a meaningful bond that neither wealth, status, nor circumstance could diminish. The experience left her with a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that the ordinary moments of service, attentiveness, and compassion had shaped an extraordinary connection. The old man continued to visit the diner, and their mornings resumed their gentle rhythm. Yet now there was a deeper understanding between them, a mutual recognition of the impact they had on each other's lives. The young waitress knew that her presence provided him with comfort, stability, and human connection, and he knew that her care was sincere, consistent, and deeply valued. The story of their bond spread quietly, not through social media or headlines, but through the lasting impression it left on both their lives. It was a reminder that human connection is powerful, that kindness matters, and that even the smallest gestures can create ripples of meaning in the lives of others. The young waitress carried these lessons with her, shaping her approach to life, work, and relationships in ways that would endure long after the mornings at the diner had passed. In the end, the extraordinary lay hidden within the ordinary. The young waitress had shown that attentiveness, empathy, and consistent care could create bonds that transcended the mundane routines of life. The old man had revealed that even those who live lives of power and responsibility value genuine human connection above all else. Together, they had created a story of trust, gratitude, and quiet significance, a story that would linger in their hearts forever, reminding them of the lasting power of kindness and the extraordinary impact of simply being present for someone else.